I never imagined I'd be standing in my marble foyer, staring through the security monitor at the faces I'd tried so hard to forget. 13 years. 13 years since they made it crystal clear I wasn't welcome at their precious family gatherings. And now here they were, standing at the gates of my sprawling estate like beggars, seeking an audience with royalty. Growing up in a modest 2-story house, I always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My older brother Marcus was the golden child. Star quarterback, valedictorian, everything my parents had dreamed of. My sister Rebecca, 2 years younger than me, was the family princess with her perfect blonde curls and charming smile that could melt anyone's heart. Before I tell you about the moment that changed everything and how I made them all regret their choices, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you're going to want to see where this story goes, and sharing it might just help someone else who's been where I was. Now let me tell you about the day my world completely fell apart. And then there was me, the middle child who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of being overlooked. From my earliest memories, I noticed the stark difference in how I was treated compared to my siblings. When Marcus brought home trophies, there were celebrations and photo sessions that lasted hours. When Rebecca performed in school plays, the entire family attended with flowers, applause, and dinner at her favorite restaurant afterward. But when I won the regional science fair in 7th grade, my father simply nodded and said, "That's nice, honey," before returning to his newspaper. The pattern continued relentlessly throughout my childhood. Christmas mornings were particularly painful. Marcus would receive the latest gaming consoles, expensive sports equipment, and anything his heart desired. Rebecca got designer clothes, jewelry that sparkled almost as much as her delighted smile, and toys that filled half the living room. I usually got practical gifts: school supplies, books from the bargain bin, or clothes from the clearance rack that never quite fit right and made me look frumpy compared to my perfectly dressed siblings. My 14th birthday became the defining moment that crystallized exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping this year would be different. My mother had promised a small celebration with a few friends from school, and I had spent days carefully writing out invitations by hand, decorating each one with little drawings and heartfelt messages. The morning of my birthday, I woke up early with excitement bubbling in my chest like champagne. But instead of birthday wishes and warm hugs, I was greeted with devastating news at the breakfast table. "Charlotte, there's been a change of plans," my mother announced, not even looking up from her coffee and morning newspaper. "Marcus has a championship game today, and we all need to support him. We'll have to postpone your party." My heart sank like a stone dropping into deep water. "But Mom, my friends are coming in 3 hours. I can't cancel now. They're probably already getting ready." "Don't be selfish," my father interjected sharply, his voice cutting through my protest like a knife. "Your brother's game is more important than some silly party." Family supports family. That phrase would haunt me for years to come. Family supports family, especially since it never seemed to apply when I was the one who needed support. The party was hastily canceled. I spent my 14th birthday sitting in freezing bleachers for 3 hours, watching Marcus play while my parents cheered enthusiastically from the sidelines. No one sang happy birthday. No one even mentioned it was my special day. When we returned home, there was no cake waiting for me, no presents on the table, just leftover pizza from the post-game celebration that my parents had ordered for Marcus and his teammates. I ate alone in my room that night, silent tears falling onto my plate, finally realizing that in my own family, I was nothing more than an afterthought, a supporting character in everyone else's story. The only person who ever made me feel truly seen and valued was my grandmother Rose. She lived across town in a cozy little house, filled with the scent of baking cookies and fresh flowers, and she visited every other weekend. During those precious hours, I felt like I actually mattered to someone. "You're special, Charlotte," she would tell me as we baked chocolate chip cookies together in our kitchen, her weathered hands guiding mine as I mixed the dough. "One day, everyone will see what I see in you, a brilliant, kind soul with unlimited potential." She never missed my school events, always sitting proudly in the front row with a huge smile on her face, even when my parents were too busy with work or Marcus's activities. She brought me books because she noticed how much I loved reading, unlike my parents who saw my love of literature as antisocial behavior that needed to be corrected. With Grandma Rose, I didn't have to compete for attention or prove my worth. Her love was freely given and unconditional, like sunlight warming my face. As I grew older, and the family dynamics became increasingly clear, I threw myself into academics with fierce determination, knowing education was my ticket to freedom. I worked part-time at a local bookstore after school, saving every penny I earned for college. The smell of books and the quiet atmosphere became my sanctuary, a place where I could dream of a future beyond the walls of my childhood home. I applied to universities in secret, researching scholarships and writing essays late into the night when everyone else was asleep. I was determined to forge my own path away from the family that made me feel invisible and unwanted. When acceptance letters began arriving from prestigious schools, along with scholarship offers that would cover most of my expenses, my parents seemed genuinely surprised, as if they'd never considered I might be capable of such achievements. "Those schools are very expensive," was my father's first comment, and I could hear something almost like relief in his voice at the prospect of me leaving home. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of environment?" It confirmed what I'd always suspected deep in my heart. I was an obligation they'd grown tired of, not a cherished daughter they would miss. Little did I know that the worst betrayal was yet to come, and it would finally reveal the devastating truth about why I never truly belonged in this family. I had just graduated from college with highest honors, earning a degree in software engineering with a specialization in artificial intelligence. At 22, I had landed my first job at a cutting-edge tech startup in the city, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I might finally earn my family's respect and recognition. Maybe now they would see that I was worth something after all. Then came the phone call that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life and my place in this world. Grandma Rose had passed away peacefully in her sleep on a quiet Tuesday morning. The news hit me like a freight train. I was completely devastated. The one person who had made me feel genuinely loved and valued was gone, and suddenly I felt more alone than I ever had before. She had been my anchor, my safe harbor in the storm of family indifference, and now that anchor had been ripped away. The funeral was held on a gray, drizzling Thursday that seemed to match the heaviness in my heart. The service was filled with relatives I barely knew. Distant cousins and family friends all offering their condolences and sharing fond memories of my grandmother. Throughout the entire ceremony, I sat alone in the third row, while my parents, Marcus and Rebecca, clustered together in the front, presenting their united front of family grief. Not once did any of them turn to check on me, despite knowing how incredibly close Grandma Rose and I had been. After the service, everyone gathered at my parents' house for the traditional post-funeral meal and the reading of Grandma Rose's will. I sat quietly in the corner of the living room, leafing through an old photo album filled with pictures of my grandmother and me baking together, reading together, laughing together. I was trying desperately to process my overwhelming grief while fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over at any moment. When the family lawyer arrived with his leather briefcase and solemn expression, everyone assembled in the formal dining room like actors taking their places on a stage. As he began reading through the will in his monotone voice, most items and assets were distributed exactly as everyone expected. The house went to my mother, the vintage car to Marcus, and Grandma Rose's extensive jewelry collection to Rebecca. Then came the surprise that would change the trajectory of my entire life. To my beloved granddaughter Charlotte, the lawyer read in his careful, professional tone, "I leave my antique pearl necklace that belonged to my own grandmother and the sum of $8,000. You were always special to me, Charlotte, and I believe wholeheartedly in your dreams and your future." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Then my mother let out a bitter, harsh laugh that made my skin crawl. $8,000 and an old pearl necklace? That's all she gets after all these years? She said, her voice dripping with disdain and disappointment. I was absolutely stunned by her cruel reaction. I hadn't expected to inherit anything at all, and I was deeply moved by Grandma Rose's thoughtful gesture. The pearl necklace was a precious family heirloom that had been passed down through generations, and it wasn't about the monetary value. It was about being remembered, being loved, being considered worthy of carrying on a family legacy. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red, his hands clenching into fists on the polished dining room table. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he sputtered, his voice rising with each word. Rose always did play favorites for no good reason whatsoever. Something inside me finally snapped. After years of staying quiet, of accepting their treatment, of trying to be the perfect, grateful daughter, I found my voice. For no good reason. I stood up from my chair, my voice trembling with emotion and years of suppressed hurt. Maybe because she was the only person in this entire family who ever showed me genuine kindness and unconditional love. That single moment of defiance was like lighting a match near a gas leak. Everything exploded at once. Years of resentment, hidden truths, and carefully guarded secrets came pouring out like water from a burst dam. "You want to talk about kindness?" my father shouted, his face now contorted with rage and something that looked almost like hatred. "We gave you everything, when absolutely no one else would take you. We clothed you, fed you, put a roof over your head, sent you to the same schools as our real children. And this is the gratitude we get for our sacrifice?" The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. "Real children? What are you talking about? What do you mean, real children?" My mother shot my father a sharp, warning look, her eyes wide with panic, but it was far too late. The secret they had carefully guarded for over 2 decades was about to explode into the open like a bomb going off. "You're not even our biological daughter," he spat, the words coming out like venom. "We adopted you when you were barely 3 years old, after your real mother died in that terrible car accident. Jennifer was your mother's college roommate who got herself pregnant out of wedlock and had nowhere else to turn when she died so suddenly. No father in the picture, no other family members willing to take responsibility for you. So we stepped up and took you in, purely out of the goodness of our hearts." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, spinning wildly out of control. Everything around me became blurry and distorted, as if I were looking at life through a funhouse mirror. Adopted. I was adopted, and they had never, ever told me. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering, where I felt like an outsider, suddenly made horrible, crystal-clear sense. 22 years, I whispered, my voice barely audible above the ringing in my ears. 22 years of living a complete lie, of not knowing who I really am. "We were planning to tell you when you were older and more mature," my mother said defensively, crossing her arms over her chest. "But then it just never seemed like the right time, and we thought it might be easier for everyone if we just didn't bring it up." "Does everyone else know except me?" I asked, my voice growing stronger as the shock began to transform into anger. "Has my entire extended family been keeping this secret from me my whole life?" "Most of the relatives know," Rebecca said with a casual shrug, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the foundation of my entire existence. "It wasn't exactly a state secret. We just didn't really talk about it around you. Not a secret to everyone except the person whose entire life it affected most." I felt physically sick, betrayed in the deepest, most fundamental way possible. Every forgotten birthday, every dismissed achievement, every time they had made me feel like I didn't quite belong, it all made perfect, heartbreaking sense now. I wasn't their daughter. I had never been their daughter. I was a charity case they had grown tired of, an obligation they had reluctantly shouldered, and apparently regretted ever since. The truth hit me like an avalanche, and I finally understood why I had never been enough for them. I never could be, because I was never truly theirs to begin with. "You should be grateful we took you in at all," Marcus finally spoke up, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Do you have any idea how many orphaned kids end up bouncing around foster homes their entire childhood? You had stability, education, opportunities that most abandoned children could only dream of having." The word abandoned hit me like a slap across the face. After 22 years of feeling like something was fundamentally wrong with me, of wondering why I could never earn their love no matter how hard I tried, the pieces were finally falling into place with devastating clarity. "Grateful?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it, only years of suppressed pain finally breaking free. Grateful for being constantly reminded that I wasn't good enough. Grateful for having my achievements ignored while you two were celebrated like conquering heroes. Grateful for never feeling loved or wanted in what I thought was my own home. "That's quite enough of this dramatic nonsense," my father said, standing up from his chair and towering over me with the same intimidating posture he'd used when I was a child. "If you can't show some basic appreciation for everything we've sacrificed for you over the years, maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." I looked around the dining room at these people who had raised me but never truly accepted me as one of their own. Not one of them came to my defense. Not even Marcus, who had always been the least openly hostile toward me. In that moment of complete isolation, surrounded by the only family I'd ever known, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. "Fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. I gathered my purse and the small velvet box containing Grandma Rose's pearl necklace, the only thing in that house that was truly mine. "I'll go. But first, I need to know one thing, and I want an honest answer." I looked directly at my mother, searching her face for any trace of the woman who had tucked me into bed as a child, who had bandaged my scraped knees, who had taught me how to ride a bicycle in our driveway. "Did you ever love me at all, even a little bit? Or was I always just a burden you regretted taking on?" The silence that followed was deafening and told me everything I needed to know. No one rushed to reassure me. No one protested that, of course, they loved me. The quiet stretched on until it became its own kind of answer, the most honest thing any of them had ever given me. I walked out of that house carrying nothing but my purse, my grandmother's necklace, and a determination that burned like fire in my chest. As I drove away in my old, beat-up car, I made a vow that would fuel every decision I made for the next 13 years. I would build a life so extraordinary, so successful, that they would one day deeply regret throwing me away like yesterday's garbage. The exclusion from family life became official and immediate after that devastating afternoon. Within weeks, I realized I had been completely erased from their lives as if I had never existed at all. No Christmas invitations arrived in my mailbox. No birthday cards or phone calls. No graduation announcements when I completed my master's degree. No wedding invitation when Rebecca got engaged 2 years later. I discovered the depth of my exile through social media, which became both a blessing and a curse. I watched from afar as they continued their picture-perfect family life without me. Holiday photos showed them gathered around the Christmas tree, all smiles and matching sweaters, with captions like "Complete Family Christmas" and "Blessed to have everyone together." The word "everyone" stung every single time. I saw photos from Marcus's wedding, a lavish affair with hundreds of guests, white tents, and twinkling lights. Rebecca was the maid of honor in a stunning blue dress. My parents beamed with pride as they walked him down the aisle, and extended family members I recognized filled the background. I wasn't just uninvited, I was completely absent from their joy, as if I had never been part of their story at all. When Rebecca had her first baby, the social media posts were overwhelming. "First grandchild," my mother posted with dozens of heart emojis. "So blessed to welcome this precious angel into our loving family." The photos showed everyone taking turns holding the baby, their faces glowing with happiness and love. I stared at those images for hours, wondering what it would have been like to be an aunt, to be included in that circle of joy and celebration. But instead of letting their rejection destroy me, I channeled every ounce of pain into building something extraordinary. With Grandma Rose's $8,000 as my starting capital and her pearl necklace as my talisman, I moved to a new city where nobody knew my story or my past. I rented a tiny studio apartment that was barely larger than a closet, furnished with secondhand items from thrift stores and garage sales. I ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights and walked everywhere to save money on transportation. Every penny I didn't spend on basic survival went toward building my future. Working at the tech startup during the day, I spent my evenings and weekends teaching myself advanced programming languages, studying emerging technologies, and developing my own ideas. I had noticed a gap in the market for user-friendly data security solutions for small businesses, companies that couldn't afford enterprise-level protection but desperately needed something better than basic password systems. I started freelancing on weekends, building simple security systems for local businesses. Word spread quickly about my innovative approach and attention to detail. Within 6 months, I had enough clients to quit my day job and focus on my growing business full-time. The loneliness was almost unbearable some nights. I had no family to call when I landed a big client or needed encouragement during tough times. No siblings to share inside jokes with, no parents to make proud of my accomplishments. But I had learned to be my own cheerleader, my own support system, my own family. 3 years after walking out of my parents' house, I incorporated Secure Shield technologies. My innovative approach to cybersecurity for small and medium businesses was exactly what the market needed. Companies were getting hacked left and right, losing customer data and facing lawsuits. But existing security solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for smaller operations. My breakthrough came when I developed an AI-powered security system that could learn and adapt to each company's unique patterns and vulnerabilities. It was like having a digital security guard that never slept, never took breaks, and got smarter every day. The first major client was a regional bank chain that had been struggling with security breaches. After implementing my system, their security incidents dropped to 0 over 18 months. Word spread through the industry like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone wanted what I was offering. By my 30th birthday, Secure Shield Technologies had grown from a one-woman operation in my studio apartment to a company with 50 employees and offices in 3 cities. We were protecting over 500 businesses and had attracted the attention of major investors who wanted to help us scale even further. I celebrated that milestone birthday alone in my new corner office, looking out at the city skyline and thinking about how different my life had become. 5 years earlier, I had been the forgotten middle child eating birthday cake alone in my childhood bedroom. Now I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, featured on magazine covers, and invited to speak at industry conferences. But success, I was learning, could be a lonely companion when you had no one to share it with who truly mattered. The transformation from struggling entrepreneur to industry titan didn't happen overnight. But when it did happen, it was like watching a rocket ship launch into orbit. By my 32nd birthday, Secure Shield Technologies had caught the attention of every major corporation in the country, and I was fielding acquisition offers that would have made my younger self's head spin. But I wasn't interested in selling, I was interested in dominating. The breakthrough that changed everything came when a massive data breach hit one of the country's largest retail chains. Over 40 million customer records were stolen, including credit card information, social security numbers, and personal addresses. The company's stock price plummeted overnight, lawsuits poured in by the thousands, and their CEO was forced to resign in disgrace. 3 days after the breach made international headlines, my phone rang. It was the interim CEO of the affected company, practically begging me to help them rebuild their entire security infrastructure from the ground up. "Miss Charlotte," he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "We've heard about your AI security system, and frankly, we're willing to pay whatever it takes to make sure this never happens to us again." Money is no object. When someone says money is no object, you listen very carefully. The contract we signed 6 weeks later was worth $58 million, the largest cybersecurity deal in the industry's history at that time. But more importantly, it established Secure Shield as the go-to solution for companies that had experienced catastrophic security failures and needed someone who could guarantee it would never happen again. Within 18 months of that landmark deal, I had similar contracts with 2 major banks, a healthcare network, 3 government agencies, and a dozen Fortune 500 companies. My AI security system had evolved into something truly revolutionary, a living, breathing digital organism that could predict and prevent cyber attacks before they even began. The financial rewards were staggering. By my 34th birthday, Secure Shield Technologies was valued at over $800 million, and my personal net worth had crossed into 9-figure territory. I was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine with the headline, "The Security Queen: How One Woman is Revolutionizing Cyber Defense." But success at this level brought challenges I had never anticipated. Suddenly, everyone wanted something from me. Investment bankers called constantly with merger proposals. Tech giants tried to poach my employees with ridiculous salary offers. Competitors attempted to reverse engineer my systems and steal my innovations. Most difficult of all were the people who suddenly wanted to be my friend now that I was wealthy and famous. Former classmates reached out on social media, claiming they, quote, always knew I'd make it big. Colleagues from my early startup days invited me to expensive dinners and industry events, hoping to leverage our connection for their own benefit. The loneliness of success became more acute with each milestone. I had built something extraordinary, exactly as I had promised myself I would, but there was no one who truly knew me to celebrate with. No family members to call with good news. No childhood friends who remembered when I was just Charlotte, the overlooked middle child. To fill this void, I threw myself even deeper into work and began expanding SecureShield's mission beyond just cybersecurity. I started an initiative called Digital Sanctuary that provided free security services to small nonprofits, domestic violence shelters, and organizations helping vulnerable populations. If I couldn't have the family connection I craved, at least I could create something meaningful that helped people who had been cast aside like I had been. The program became wildly successful and brought me more satisfaction than any lucrative corporate contract ever could. Knowing that my technology was protecting women's shelters from being tracked by abusive partners, or helping youth organizations keep their data safe from predators, gave my work a purpose that went far beyond profit margins. As SecureShield's reputation continued to grow, so did the demands on my time and energy. I was invited to speak at international conferences, serve on cybersecurity advisory boards, and consult with world leaders on digital defense strategies. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own family was now one of the most recognized names in the technology industry. But with great success came an unexpected problem: the constant scrutiny of my personal life. Business journalists wanted to know about my background, my family, my personal relationships. I became a master at deflecting personal questions and keeping interviews focused on my company and technology innovations. "You're very private about your personal life," one persistent reporter noted during a magazine interview. "Is there a reason you don't talk about your family or your upbringing?" "I prefer to let my work speak for itself," I replied smoothly, a response I had practiced dozens of times. My past is less interesting than the future we're building at SecureShield. What I never told any of them was that I had been monitoring my biological family's social media accounts for years, not because I missed them, that wound had mostly healed, but because I was curious about how their lives had unfolded since they'd cast me out. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty. Marcus had gone through a bitter divorce and was struggling to keep his small business afloat. His ex-wife had taken him to court over unpaid child support, and his social media posts showed a man who looked older and more defeated than his years. Rebecca's marriage had also failed, and she was working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet while raising 2 young children as a single mother. My parents had retired, but their retirement savings had taken a hit during the economic downturn. They had downsized to a smaller house and seemed to be struggling financially. The confident middle-class family that had once looked down on me appeared to be fracturing under the weight of real-world pressures. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. I wasn't cruel enough to take pleasure in other people's pain, but I also felt no urge to reach out or offer assistance. They had made their choice 13 years ago, and I had made mine. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted. I purchased a stunning estate in an exclusive neighborhood, complete with a library that would have made Grandma Rose proud, gardens that bloomed year-round, and enough space to host the charity events that had become central to my mission. The house was more than just a home. It was a statement. Every room was designed to reflect the woman I had become, rather than the girl I had been. The walls were covered with awards, recognition plaques, and photos of me with world leaders and industry titans. The library held first editions of books I had loved as a child, along with technical manuals and business guides that had shaped my career. In the garden, I installed a small memorial bench dedicated to Grandma Rose, surrounded by her favorite flowers. It was the one place on the property where I allowed myself to think about the past and the woman who had believed in me when no one else would. As my 35th birthday approached, I reflected on the empire I had built and the journey that had brought me here. Secure Shield Technologies now employed over 300 people, protected thousands of organizations worldwide, and generated annual revenues that exceeded the GDP of small countries. But the most valuable thing I had built wasn't measured in dollars or recognition. It was the unshakable confidence that came from proving to myself that I could create something meaningful and lasting without anyone else's approval or support. That confidence would be tested in ways I never could have imagined when my security system chimed on a quiet Sunday morning, alerting me to unexpected visitors at my front gate. After 13 years of silence, they had finally come calling. There they were, standing at my gate like ghosts from a life I had deliberately left behind. My father, now in his 70s, his once imposing frame stooped with age and what looked like defeat. My mother beside him, her face more lined than I remembered, wearing the same style of conservative clothing she had always favored. Marcus stood slightly behind them, and I barely recognized him. His athletic build had given way to the soft middle of middle age, his face bearing the stress lines of a man who had faced too many disappointments. Rebecca was there too, clutching the hands of two children who must have been her kids, her once perfect appearance now showing the wear of single motherhood and financial strain. 13 years. 13 years of complete silence, of treating me as if I had never existed, of living their lives without so much as a birthday card or Christmas greeting. And now here they were, standing at the entrance to the empire I had built without them. My first instinct was to ignore them completely, to let them stand there until they gave up and left. But curiosity won out over my better judgment. What could possibly have brought them here after all this time? What desperation could have driven them to seek out the daughter they had so thoroughly discarded? With trembling hands that I hoped they couldn't see through the security camera, I pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral and professional, as if they were strangers requesting directions. "Charlotte, it's Mom and Dad." My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding smaller and more fragile than I remembered. "And Marcus and Rebecca are here too, with the grandkids. We were hoping we could talk to you, sweetheart." Sweetheart. After 13 years of silence, she was calling me sweetheart, as if we had just spoken yesterday. As if there hadn't been over a decade of intentional exclusion and deliberate erasure from family history. I should have told them to leave. I should have explained that they had forfeited any right to conversation when they chose to cut me out of their lives completely. Instead, some deeply buried part of me, that little girl who had always longed for her family's acceptance, made me press the button to open the gate. I rushed to my bedroom to change, pulling on designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than they spent on groceries in a month. I wasn't trying to impress them, but I also wasn't going to let them see me as anything less than the successful woman I had become. By the time the doorbell rang, I had composed myself outwardly, even though my heart was racing like I had just run a marathon. I opened the front door with what I hoped was an expression of polite but distant interest, rather than the emotional chaos that was actually churning inside me. The 5 of them stood on my doorstep, looking up at the grand facade of my home with poorly concealed awe and what might have been envy. The house was impressive. I had made sure of that, with its soaring columns, marble steps, and perfectly manicured grounds that spoke of wealth and success in every carefully chosen detail. "Charlotte," my mother said, stepping forward with arms outstretched as if to embrace me like we were having a normal family reunion. "You look absolutely wonderful, honey. So successful and beautiful." I stepped back slightly, avoiding the embrace that felt far too familiar and intimate after years of complete absence. "Thank you," I replied coolly. "This is certainly unexpected. I can't remember the last time we spoke." "We've been trying to find the right time to reach out," my father said, his voice softer and more tentative than I remembered from our last explosive encounter. "When we saw that article about your company in Business Weekly, and then the feature in Forbes, we thought it might be time to reconnect with our daughter." Business Weekly. Forbes. Of course they hadn't come because they missed me or regretted their actions. They had come because they had seen evidence of my wealth and success splashed across national publications. because they had finally realized that the unwanted adopted daughter they had discarded had become someone worth knowing. "Please, come in," I said, my ingrained sense of hospitality overriding my better judgment. Even as my mind processed their true motivations, I found myself leading them through the grand foyer, with its imported marble floors and crystal chandelier, into the main living room where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked my meticulously designed gardens. "This is quite a home," Marcus said, whistling softly as he took in the custom furnishings, original artwork, and obvious signs of wealth that filled every corner of the space. "You've certainly done well for yourself, Charlotte." "Thank you," I replied simply, gesturing for them to sit on the Italian leather sofas that had cost more than most people's cars. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee, water, juice for the children?" "Coffee would be lovely," my mother said, perching on the edge of the sofa, as if she were afraid to fully settle into my home and make herself comfortable. I used the excuse of preparing coffee to escape to the kitchen for a few precious minutes, leaning against the marble counter and taking deep breaths to steady myself. I had imagined this scenario countless times over the years, fantasized about what I would say if they ever showed up in my life again. But now that it was actually happening, I felt unprepared and vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When I returned with a tray of coffee served in my finest bone china, a petty display of wealth and sophistication I couldn't resist, the children were exploring the room while the adults sat in uncomfortable silence that spoke volumes about the awkwardness of the situation. "These are my children," Rebecca said as I set down the tray, her voice carrying a note of pride mixed with something that might have been desperation. "Emma is 8, and Tyler is 10. I nodded to the children, who regarded me with the curious but cautious eyes of kids who sensed adult tension without understanding its source. "Hello," I said, unsure how to interact with these niece and nephew I had never met. Had Rebecca told them about me? Did they know they had an aunt who had been completely erased from family photos and conversations? "They're beautiful children," I said, because it seemed like the expected response and because it was true. They had inherited Rebecca's striking features and seemed well-behaved, despite the obvious stress of the situation. "We've missed you, Charlotte," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes in what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated emotional display. "All these years we've thought about you and wondered how you were doing. Have you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger that was building like a storm beneath my calm exterior. "That's interesting, because I haven't received so much as a birthday card or Christmas greeting in 13 years. I haven't been invited to weddings, baby showers, or holiday celebrations. In fact, based on your social media posts, it seems like you've been quite content having your complete family gatherings without me." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as my words hit their target. They had forgotten that social media works both ways, that their public celebrations of family togetherness had been visible to the daughter they had deliberately excluded. "We didn't know how to reach out," my father said weakly. "After the way things ended, after all the things that were said, we weren't sure if you would want to hear from us." "You could have tried," I pointed out with calm precision. "My contact information hasn't exactly been difficult to find. Secure Shield Technologies isn't a hidden company operating in secret. But you didn't try, did you? Not once in 13 years did any of you make an effort to see if I was alive, dead, happy, or struggling." The truth of my words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, impossible to ignore or dismiss. They had made a choice to erase me from their lives, and now they were being forced to confront the consequences of that decision. "We've been following your career," Marcus interjected, as if reading about my success in magazines somehow counted as maintaining a relationship. "Seeing all your accomplishments, how incredibly successful you've become, we're all very proud of what you've achieved." "Proud?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us like an accusation. "Now you're proud. Not when I graduated summa cum laude from college. Not when I started my own company. Not when I needed encouragement and support during the difficult early years. Only now, when I have a mansion and a billion-dollar company, now you're proud." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with unspoken truths and years of accumulated resentment that couldn't be swept away with a few awkward pleasantries and forced smiles. The uncomfortable silence stretched on until my father cleared his throat and shifted forward in his seat, his hands clasped tightly together in what I recognized as his old nervous gesture from childhood family meetings. "Charlotte," he began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had clearly rehearsed this conversation many times. "We didn't just come here to reconnect, though that's certainly important to us. We also came because, well, we find ourselves in a difficult situation and could really use your help." And there it was. The real reason for their sudden appearance in my life after 13 years of complete silence. Not love, not regret, not a genuine desire to rebuild our fractured family relationships. They needed something from me, and that something was undoubtedly financial. "What kind of help?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my legs, and prepared to hear exactly how desperate they had become. "Financial help," my father admitted, having the grace to look embarrassed as the words left his mouth. "My retirement investments took a major hit during the market downturn, and the pension from my engineering firm isn't covering our expenses like we thought it would. We're facing foreclosure on the house next month." "I lost my marketing job 6 months ago," Rebecca added, her voice barely above a whisper as she glanced protectively at her children. "The divorce settlement left me with almost nothing, and childcare costs are astronomical. I'm working 2 part-time jobs, but it's not enough to cover rent and basic necessities." Marcus nodded grimly, his turn in this carefully orchestrated presentation of family desperation. "My contracting business went under last year. The economy hit small construction companies hard, and I couldn't compete with the larger firms. I'm facing bankruptcy, and my ex-wife is threatening to take me back to court over missed child support payments." I listened to their litany of financial woes with a mixture of fascination and disgust. These were the same people who had thrown me away like garbage, who had erased me from family photos and celebrations, who had made it crystal clear that I was unwanted and unloved. And now they sat in my living room, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my success, asking for handouts like common beggars. "We were thinking," my father continued, apparently mistaking my silence for consideration rather than the calculated assessment it actually was, "that perhaps you could help us get back on our feet. Maybe a loan of around $3 million would allow us to save the family home, help Rebecca get stable housing for the children, and give Marcus a fresh start with his business." $3 million. The audacity was breathtaking, even for them. "Of course we'd pay you back," my mother added quickly, as if that somehow made their request more palatable. "With interest, naturally. And we thought maybe you could consider bringing us into your company somehow. You know, keep the success in the family where it belongs." "Keep it in the family," I repeated slowly, savoring the irony of those words. "The same family that hasn't considered me a member for the past 13 years? "We know we made mistakes," Rebecca said, tears starting to stream down her face in what might have been genuine emotion or carefully calculated manipulation. "We were young and stupid, and we said things we didn't mean, but we're family, Charlotte. Blood is thicker than water, and family should help family in times of need." "Blood is thicker than water," I mused, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked my garden, where Grandma Rose's memorial bench sat surrounded by blooming flowers. That's an interesting phrase, especially coming from people who reminded me countless times that I wasn't actually blood family. I turned back to face them, my decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at all of you sitting in my home," I began, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made them all sit up straighter. "I see people who threw away a daughter because she wasn't genetically theirs. I see parents who missed every important milestone in my life because they were too focused on their real children. I see siblings who excluded me from weddings and baby showers and holiday celebrations, who posted family photos with captions about having everyone together while deliberately leaving me out." My mother started to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished. For 13 years you lived your lives as if I had never existed. You celebrated holidays, shared milestones, and supported each other through hardships. You were a family in every sense of the word, just without me. And that was your choice." I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking each of them in the eye. Now you come to my home, the home I built, the success I created entirely without your help or support. And you want to talk about family as if it's something that can be picked up and put down whenever it becomes convenient or profitable. The color had drained from my father's face. My mother was crying silently, whether from genuine remorse or frustration at the failure of their plan, I couldn't tell. Let me be very clear about something, I continued. I don't need parents who only acknowledge me when I'm successful enough to be useful to them. I don't need siblings who mock me behind my back, but come asking for handouts when their own lives fall apart. I built this life without you, and I certainly don't need you in it now. But Charlotte, Marcus said desperately, we're family. We raised you. Doesn't that count for something? You took in a 3-year-old child and did the legal minimum required of guardians. I corrected him. You fed me, clothed me, and sent me to school because the law required it. But you made sure I knew every single day that it was an obligation, not a choice made from love. I stood up again, signaling that this conversation was coming to an end. However, I said, and I saw hope flicker in their eyes, I'm not completely heartless. Emma and Tyler are innocent in all of this. They don't deserve to suffer because of the choices their family members made years before they were born. I walked to my desk and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Rebecca. That's the contact information for my attorney. I'm establishing education funds for both children that will cover their college expenses when the time comes. The money will be managed by a trust, and you'll have no access to it. It can only be used for educational purposes. Rebecca stared at the card through her tears, her expression a mixture of gratitude and disappointment. As for the rest of you, I continued, I suggest you figure out your financial problems the same way I did, through hard work, determination, and without relying on family members who don't actually care about you. My father stood up, his face flushed with familiar anger. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? What exactly did you do for me? I asked quietly. Remind me, because, from where I'm standing, you did what any decent human being would do when presented with an orphan child. You provided the basics required by law. You didn't do it out of love. You didn't do it out of choice. You did it because it was the right thing to do, and you resented every minute of it. We could have put you in foster care, my mother said, her voice rising with desperation. Maybe you should have, I replied. At least then I would have understood from the beginning that I was unwanted. Instead of spending 22 years trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given, I walked them to the door, maintaining my composure through sheer force of will. I wish you all the best in solving your financial difficulties, I said as they stepped outside, but you'll have to do it without me. I learned a long time ago that the only person I can truly rely on is myself. As I watched them walk back to their car, an old sedan that had clearly seen better days, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but a profound sense of closure. Rebecca turned back before getting in the car, her expression softer than it had been all afternoon. For what it's worth, she called out, I really am proud of what you've accomplished. You've become an extraordinary woman. Too little, too late, I replied. But thank you. I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing the tears to come. They weren't tears of sadness or regret, but of release. In refusing their manipulation and standing up for myself one final time, I had finally freed myself from the last chains of their approval. Later that evening, I sat in my garden on Grandma Rose's memorial bench, twisting her pearl necklace around my fingers, as I had done countless times over the years when I needed to think. I hope I made you proud today, Grandma, I whispered to the evening air. I finally learned the lesson you tried to teach me all those years ago. That family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, respect, and choosing to show up for each other day after day. The family that had defined me by my absence had lost their power over my happiness forever. In their place, I had built something better. A chosen family of employees who had become friends, mentors who had become confidants, and a community of people whose lives I had touched through my charity work. As I sat surrounded by the life I had created, and the garden that bloomed with new possibility, I felt truly at peace for the first time in years. The little girl who had once felt invisible in her own home had grown into a woman who could never be overlooked again. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. If you've ever felt rejected by people who should have loved you unconditionally, remember this: your worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it. You have the power to build a life so meaningful, so successful, that their absence becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the family you choose is infinitely better than the one you were born into. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of triumph over adversity, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them most.